March 11th, 2011 at 2:46 in the afternoon. In seconds, Japan's coastline was shattered, rocked by a magnitude 9.1 earthquake so powerful it shifted the entire country 8 feet. Then, far offshore, warning buoys spiked higher than anyone believed possible. Waves as high as 133 feet raced toward coastal cities behind seawalls that were about to fail. This is the hour when nature nearly erased a nation, and what happened next turned catastrophe into a global crisis. Seismographs across Japan jolted into motion at 2:46 in the afternoon as the earth ruptured beneath the Pacific, 45 miles off the Tohoku coast. The ground heaved with a violence never recorded in the nation's history. Buildings from Sendai to Tokyo, over 200 miles away, rocked and swayed for nearly 6 minutes. Early warning systems offered only seconds of notice, barely enough for a single sharp intake of breath before the full force of a magnitude 9.1 earthquake tore through city streets, highways, and countryside. The quake's reach was planetary. Honshu, Japan's largest island, lurched 8 feet eastward. The planet itself shifted, its axis nudged by 7 inches. In the quake zone, roads split open, bridges twisted, and entire neighborhoods crumpled. The initial shock left at least 200 people dead, a number dwarfed by what would follow. But for those trapped in collapsed buildings, the disaster was already absolute. Damage estimates soared to $200 billion within hours as infrastructure buckled under the relentless shaking. Industrial sites were not spared. At the Cosmo oil refinery in Chiba, storage tanks ruptured, igniting a blaze that sent columns of black smoke billowing into the sky. The fire raged uncontrolled, a signal visible for miles, a city's skyline rewritten in smoke and flame. As the ground finally settled, Japan stood in stunned silence, the scale of destruction only beginning to reveal itself. But offshore, a new threat was already in motion, racing toward land at impossible speed. Ocean sensors began to register something extraordinary. Offshore GPS buoys spiked past 20 feet, far beyond what any warning system had predicted. Minutes ticked by as the sea itself seemed to rise, drawing back with unnatural speed, then racing forward. At 3:21 p.m., a wall of water, measured later at nearly 26 feet, struck Miyako. For one survivor, the sound came first, a deep rolling roar, then the sudden violent rush as water crashed through streets and homes. He recalled that it was like a mountain moving, watching helplessly as entire neighborhoods vanished in seconds. Along the Sanriku coast, the geography turned deadly. V-shaped bays carved deep into the shoreline funneled the tsunami's force, amplifying waves to unimaginable heights. In Iwate Prefecture, the run-up reached 133 feet, the highest ever recorded in Japan. Seawalls, once thought impenetrable, were overtopped and swept away as if made of paper. In Rikuzentakata, a 10-meter barrier offered no protection. The water simply climbed over, carrying buildings, vehicles, and people inland before dragging the wreckage back out to sea. The devastation did not stop at one town or city. From Hokkaido in the north to Ibaraki in the south, a 420-mile stretch of coastline was erased in less than an hour. The tsunami's reach overwhelmed every defense, leaving behind only silence and a landscape stripped of all familiarity. The full weight of the disaster was now bearing down on the communities along Japan's northeastern coast. Across the battered coastline, the true scale of loss began to surface with each passing hour. More than 18,000 lives were swept away or left unaccounted for, their names filling lists that grew longer by the day. Official counts later recorded 19,759 dead and 2,553 still missing, numbers that could never capture the silence left behind. Entire communities vanished, their streets and memories erased in the surge. Aerial surveys revealed the devastation from above. 121,996 buildings completely destroyed, with another 282,941 half collapsed or gutted beyond repair. The destruction carved a scar 420 miles long along the Pacific, where the tsunami hit hardest. Yet the broader disaster zone stretched nearly 1,242 miles, reaching deep into towns and villages far from the initial impact. For survivors, the aftermath was measured not just in numbers, but in the absence of neighbors, the emptiness where homes once stood. There was nothing left, one resident recalled, only the sea and what it had taken. Hospitals and emergency centers filled beyond capacity as the scale of the disaster became clear. In coastal towns, morgues ran out of space within hours. Bodies arrived faster than they could be identified or prepared, leaving staff with no choice but to store victims in hallways and even refrigerated trucks parked outside. A morgue worker later wrote that they worked without sleep as the numbers kept rising. There were not enough hands and not enough time. Entire communities scattered. More than 100,000 people were forced from their homes, some carrying only what they could grab in the rush to escape. School gymnasiums, community halls, and makeshift shelters filled with families separated from loved ones, unsure if they would ever return. Emergency service logs recorded a surge in requests for relocation and basic necessities, food, water, and blankets. The systems meant to provide order and dignity struggled to keep pace with overwhelming loss. For survivors, the need for stability grew more urgent as night fell and the reality of displacement set in. At Fukushima Daiichi, the earthquake's tremors had barely faded when the plant's main power lines collapsed. The plant lost its main power almost immediately. Automatic shutdown systems kicked in, halting the reactors, but the real danger was just beginning. The facility's seawall, built to withstand waves up to 19 feet, faced a tsunami more than twice that height. At around 3:41 p.m., a 49-foot surge slammed into the plant, pouring over the barrier and flooding the lower levels. The tsunami's force overwhelmed every expectation. In minutes, salt water engulfed the emergency diesel generators housed in the basements, generators that were the last line of defense for cooling the reactor cores. Those generators failed as seawater flooded their rooms. Control rooms fell dark as backup batteries drained, leaving operators to navigate by flashlight and instinct. Screens that once displayed coolant levels and core temperatures went blank. Without power, pumps stopped, and the water that kept the uranium fuel rods stable began to boil away. Temperatures inside the reactors soared. With every passing hour, the risk of core damage grew. Outside the plant, the government moved quickly, first ordering evacuations within a 2-mile radius, then extending the zone to 12 miles as the crisis escalated. Officials called for rapid evacuations to protect people downwind and along the coast. The plant's original design never accounted for a disaster of this scale. Decisions made decades earlier, placing generators in low-lying areas and relying on a seawall built for smaller waves, now left the facility defenseless. Inside, engineers and technicians scrambled to improvise, knowing that failure would mean catastrophe not just for Fukushima, but for all of Japan. March 12th at 3:36 p.m. The first hydrogen explosion at Fukushima Daiichi shattered the roof of Reactor Unit 1, sending a plume of white smoke into the sky. Less than 48 hours later, on March 14th at 11:01 a.m., Unit 3 erupted with even greater force, scattering debris across the plant grounds. The situation spiraled further on March 15th as Reactor Unit 2 vented a massive cloud of radioactive gas and Unit 4 caught fire. Inside the plant, radiation levels spiked to 1,000 times above normal. Alarms blared, dosimeters flashed warning lights, and every surface became a potential hazard. Amid the chaos, a small group of engineers, technicians, and firefighters, known later as the Fukushima 50, remained behind. They worked in rotating shifts, donning heavy protective gear, and logging each hour as radiation seeped through concrete and steel. Their task was clear: prevent a full meltdown, whatever the cost. For nearly a month, these 50 men and women battled rising temperatures, failing pumps, and invisible contamination. They improvised water injections, vented hydrogen, and raced to restore any fragment of control. Every action was a gamble against time and physics. Beyond the plant, more than 10,000 tons of contaminated water leaked into the Pacific Ocean. Radioactive particles drifted on wind and current and were detected as far away as the United States and Europe. The cost of nuclear cleanup climbed past $180 billion, dwarfing any prior accident. Without the sacrifice of those who stayed, the fallout could have spread far wider, leaving not just Japan, but the world facing consequences beyond imagination. Even now, over 100,000 people remain displaced, and vast regions are uninhabitable. As climate extremes intensify and energy risks mount worldwide, Japan's scars warn us, and nature's power dwarfs our preparations. The next disaster won't wait for us to be ready. What lessons will we choose to remember?